Yeshua Engdao, who is the Senior Advisor on Peace Building and Reconciliation from the Ministry of Peace here in Addis Ababa, and she's also an assistant professor at the Institute of Peace and Security Studies from Addis Ababa University here in Ethiopia. And she'll be talking about a number of important elements regarding why safe learning spaces for young people are very important and how we should respond as key educators. May I invite you, Dr. Tigist, to take the floor. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you very well.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're having a challenge with the internet. I have also blackouts. So I will switch the video as well because the internet is very weak. So as Dr. Victoria mentioned, I will be talking about safe learning environment and peace education and some of my research that I don't know if you could see, I have a book on peace education. So the focus was on Ethiopia. And then on safe learning environment, I have this publication updated. I have updated this UNESCO, ICBA, UNDP, UN Women and IOM. So basically, I'll be talking about from part of my research from this handbook on safe learning, and also from my book on peace education. I'll be speaking about peace education. Once again, thank you for having me, and thank you UNESCO ICBA for organizing this important forum. Thank you, Dr. Emiko, for your excellent leadership and for doing this amazing job on, in promoting peace education and culture of peace and peace building. I'm happy to, talk about this topic among so many distinguished educators for peace. Well, I think the first point when we discuss about the issue regards to the elements of safe learning space and how they respond to the needs of learners. First, when you talk about, I think, safe learning environment, we need to understand the context sensitivity. That's very, very important. Context sensitivity requires an environment where the learning or the training is offered in a safe place, which encourage diversity and representation of different groups in the society. In this manner, the environment or the environment serves as a safe haven for exploring and understanding the root causes of violence or injustice, or in a conflict dynamics, or in a if there is a conflict in a particular society. So they can be space for dialogue and interaction across different sectors, gender, religion, ethnicity, and socioeconomic divides. Now, as you all know, the world is struggling with COVID-19, and schools, it's quite difficult, to take all the safety measures and protocols from, measuring temperature, sanitizing, all these protocols of COVID, checking body temperature before entering to school or compound, or before entering to the class, wearing face masks, social distancing, vaccination now for teachers and students. So all these are parts of the safe learning environment in school setting. As I mentioned in my introduction, context sensitivity is particularly very, very important in a very fragile and vulnerable and violent context, because it could help the educators to practice the principles of do no harm. This principle of do no harm is about minimizing the risk for our educational interventions causing unintended escalation of conflict and violence or deepening divides. This is particularly true in in the past and sometimes ongoing tensions. For instance, in Ethiopia, where winds are sustained during conflicts are still fresh, as we are witnessing now. So any positive intervention could have unintended negative effects because of different interpretations of terms or phrases or even nonverbal communication. So it's very paramount to understand the context and sensitivity of the different issues of conflict. So to move on, a few practical tips to facilitate the context responsiveness and sensitivity. I think first we need to any educator should carry out a comprehensive analysis of the country context, including the elements of the social, cultural, economic, and political background, possible cause of the conflicts. And also, second, determine the needs and expectations of the trainers in the country. Plan your sessions as educators and plan your activities to include the voice of different groups, such as youth from marginalized groups, IDPs, internally displaced persons, refugees, orphans, children with disabilities, and also to allow space for everybody's ideas and opinions. And also consider the language, the minority-majority relations, power dynamics, gender, age, culture, ethnic and religious diversity. Somebody can mute.
Sorry, Mr. Gabriel, can you mute your microphone, please? Okay, please proceed. Okay.
And then the other few practical steps to facilitate context responsiveness and sensitivity are to ensure that all materials are context sensitive in relation to language and visual descriptions, ensure that they do not portray any particular bias particular bias or particular stereotype against any group. So these are very important things to, for safe learning. So these are very fundamental points. These are very key, crucial points to ensure that all the different types of safe learning are safeguarded within and outside the school setting. Safe learning environment provide protection for physical, emotional, environmental, cognitive, and spiritual safety as well. Additionally, I will go in detail a bit what this means, or I will give you some example. Additionally, in conflict-affected and fragile contexts, educators must be extra sensitive to the trauma and healing needs of the learners. Educators have to keep in mind that some learning activities may invoke strong memories and emotions in learners, and should in such situations provide additional support immediately and beyond classroom. So the training guide I've showed you earlier have updated 2 years ago for UNESCO ICPA, talks about, the focus is on the creation of safe space for participation and exploration within the environment of the school or the training center. Such safe space allow for educators to guide learners and discussions of sensitive and contextual topics and help them to understand and reflect on the complex realities that often surround them. So if you are interested, you can read further the focus on school safety that I mentioned earlier. It was published by UNESCO. You can read further on the school safety guide tools for teachers. The other point before I dive into my second point is what are the factors that threaten safety of the learning environment that should be addressed for a learning process to ensure participation and collaboration are the issues that I mentioned. I want to mention a few issues. I think when we look at the factors that threaten safety of the learning environment, we need to look at the physical safety, the emotional safety, the environmental safety, the cognitive safety, and the spiritual safety. Briefly, the physical safety, as you all know, related to gender-based violence, including sexual harassment, child trafficking, recruitment of child soldiers, recruitment of gangs, and etc., including corporal punishment in a school setting and child marriage. These are the factors that threaten the safety of the learning environment. When it comes to the emotional safety, the verbal abuse, isolation, discrimination, bullying, exclusion, etc. When you look at the environmental safety or the environs, for instance, if there is no proper construction of training place for the schools, lack of gender responsive school environment, unavailability of washing facilities such as toilets, sanitary materials for girls, lack of library, laboratories, and etc. When you go to cognitive safety, such as malnutrition, inadequate stimulation of learning opportunities, indoctrination, and lack of co-cultural activities, including art, sports, clubs, different clubs, such as peace clubs, drama, and other skill developments. And finally, when we look at the spiritual safety, lack of space for silence and reflection, or no space for possibilities, no emphasis on self-expression, for questioning, and etc. Please note that this ordering is for the purpose of clarity and it's not often to influence or it doesn't mean anything. So these are very important factors to really consider. And how do you respond to the needs of learners in safe learning? I think I want to raise a few points and then I will jump into the second point. First, I think we have, as educators, we have to actively encourage learners to collaborate with one another. And secondly, create opportunities to discuss different viewpoints, different opinions. And third, to encourage the development of, a respectful relationship among the peers. And fourth, encourage teamwork for problem solving rather than promoting competition. So as educators, we must create opportunities for collaboration, not only among those from similar groups, but also from groups who may be seen as different and separate. When I go to the second point, peace education as a holistic and integrated approach case study in Ethiopia, the book that I mentioned, but let me start briefly on the concept or the elements of peace education. What does it mean when we say peace education? Peace education is seen as a process of promoting the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values needed to bring about behavioral change that will enable children, youth, and adults to prevent conflict and violence, both overt and structural, to resolve conflict peacefully and to create the conditions conducive to peace, whether at intrapersonal, interpersonal, intergroup, national, or international level. For lasting peace building process, the human beings involved would have to be, jolted from previous mindsets to become, conscious of duties and responsibilities of responsible citizens, by examining and discussing their world views acquired through culture, family, community, society, history, religion, etc. So they can become aware of the need for change in themselves and of the need to give more respect for the rights and well-being of others. So the theory and practice of formal and non-formal peace education have evolved from the work of many prominent philosophers, educators, and social theorists such as John Comans, Immanuel Kant, Maria Montessori, and so many of them. They all advocate for the principles of peaceful living such as cooperation, tolerance, diversity, reconciliation, non-violence way of resolving conflict, and argue that all these principles should be integrated into education system in the schools. So peace education is a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field, and it overlaps with so many educational initiatives such as disarmament education, human rights education, development plans, citizenship, civics and ethics, gender awareness courses, and international law, environment considerations, and all that. So peace education could take place in a formal setting, which are structured and planned, and in a formal setting, which are semi-structured and in a informal setting. So peace education is structured according to the needs and causes of violence, and it's very flexible. It could be delivered flexibly. For instance, media can be used as social meetings and gatherings, different associations and clubs, such as peace clubs, and other means available could be used. When we come to the content, I think the content also broadly aimed at resolving the root causes of conflict and to foster sustainable peace building is very useful in a society, especially in a post-war and post-conflict societies marked by trauma. Peace education has been raised in the 20th century due to the need and demand. It's one of the new subject areas of study emerging in 21st century. So peace education is very broad. It teaches skills and methods for transferring knowledge and best practices for facilitating and fostering dialogue, constructive interaction for common goals, nonviolent conflict resolution skills and techniques, citizenship and civic rights responsibilities, ethical respect for the rights of others, for peaceful reconciliation and coexistence, international human rights, gender equality for development, and a number of other possible topics guided by prior needs of assessment of a particular context, depending on the need of the country's specific context and needs. So of course, I can talk about a lot, but then just for the sake of time, in my book, I have studied, I showed you earlier, the case study of Ethiopia at secondary level and preparatory schools. I've studied 3 schools, one in Mekelle at Yohannes and 2 schools in Addis. And so I just want to give you a few tips on what should be a holistic approach in peace education, and what should educators must recognize the different approaches to peace building and designing peace education that satisfies the needs of a specific situation for reducing the root causes and minimizing violence in preparatory and secondary schools. When you look at the holistic and integrated approach of peace education, I think there are 3 embedded concepts: the school, the home, and the community. These are very embedded, and they are very holistic, and it needs integrated approach. They are the school, the home, and the community are mutually inclusive, and it needs holistic integrated intervention. As you all know, the family is very important in shaping the youth, the kids, the children, for better or worse. The issue of parenting is very, very significant. There must be some, obviously, sort of exchange meetings with teachers and administrators, such as, for instance, to have a family fun day, family sport day with family and community, such as, for instance, organizing with the community different sport activities, open days for family where the school and the community and the family come together as one community. This could be one example. And then also other specific recommendations could be, to internalize the concept of violence within the specific context, and also acknowledge diversity and complexity in a given context. We have to acknowledge the diversity and the complexity of the school, and instill a sense of ownership. Shouldn't be bottom-up approach. It should be, inclusive. It should include teachers, parents, and the school community. And again, address the root cause of frustration. What is the root cause of frustration? What is the root cause of the conflict? We need to find that. And then strengthening the existing and new positive initiatives. I'm sure for instance, in Ethiopia, there are some good pipelines. And then we have to, strengthen that. And also in other countries as well, there, I'm sure in Kenya or Uganda, in each school setting or in each country, there are some existing and positive initiatives. So we have to strengthen those positive initiatives, the good things that are in pipeline, such as, for instance, the revision of curriculum, trying to integrate culture of peace and peace education in the curriculum from KG up to university level. And also to promote students to, for instance, for instance, draw peaceful graffitis, help them to promote peace, peace education, culture of peace, and sustainable peace building. And then in my finding, for instance, in my case study, I found there was alarming trend of violence increasing. So reversing the alarming trend of violence based on the case study, I found that there were visible and invisible violence in the school, and at a higher magnitude, and increasing trend was very high. So the violence in the school is not confined to the school, as you know, in the school environment, but also affects the community and the nation by large. So it needs to be addressed. It's not only the teaching and learning that is affected, but also, historical evidence indicate that many of the regime changes in Ethiopia, I'm sure in other countries as well, are sparked in the schools as the heartbeats of the community. Hence, its serious attention is needed, to giving, and also reverse the unhealthy trend. Again, the other point is addressing the root cause of youth violence. What is it? As I mentioned above, the root cause of violence in schools are different combinations of factors, dealing with governance, but also with the environment, both inside and outside the school. Hence, empowering the different school community, including teachers and students. Decision making is very essential. For instance, reverse, the alarming whatever issue we have. And finally, I think we need to have integrated approach, as I mentioned, to assure partnership, unity, and solidarity in the school community is very key to have integrated approach. And finally, develop resilience to violence by addressing the cause of violence, and working on sustainable peace building is a good entry point in developing peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tigist.
Through genuine partnership and ownership. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tigist, for the wonderful presentation. It's quite an interesting discussion where you talk about a number of things that are related to ensuring that we are creating safe spaces for our learners. Context sensitivity is very critical. Undertaking a root cause analysis and many other things that you've raised are so important. And I'm sure that colleagues are listening in carefully. And in case you have views, kindly use the chat room to give your comments. My colleague Suchith is there, and the Jerusalem are taking a note of your comments within the chat room. I want to request Mr. Ali Mahamane, kindly switch off your video so that we can pay attention to the speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, in the interest of time, colleagues, allow me to move forward to the next panelist, and this is Dr. Ilham Narsar. She's the senior researcher and director for the International Institute of Islamic Thought in the USA. I know that she's a well-experienced researcher. She's a teacher educator, and she's an advisor on peace education issues, and she has done this in different capacities. Kindly, colleagues, allow me to invite Dr. Narsar to take the floor. Over to you.
Dr. Victoria, while Dr. Ilham is taking the floor, can we take a group picture so that in case if our director, Dr. Emiko, wants to go, I know that she's busy, so if she's not staying with us, it will be a good opportunity to have the group picture now. Apologies, Dr. Victoria.
No, that's in order. That's in order.
Okay, thank you.
We can switch on our videos. Please bring up those wonderful smiles for the video. And I know Suchith is an expert in this, so he'll be taking the video. I hand over to you, Suchith, to guide us.
Yes, if everybody can turn on their videos and adjust your camera so that your face can be seen. If in case your background is lighter, there's light from behind you, like Mr. Darius, if you can turn around slightly so that the light doesn't cover your face, that would be great. Perfect. Others, we have some of you on camera now. Would others like to join as well? Let me give you a few more seconds to turn on your cameras and join us for the picture.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I take one picture now, and with anybody else, I take another. Hold on. Yes, I think that's okay. I took everybody who's on screen.
Thank you very much. So we can switch off our videos. Thank you very much, Suchith. And over to you, Dr. Narsar.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's morning for me, but I'm sure it's also evening for many of you. Thank you and greetings from Washington, D.C. I am thrilled to be part of this panel discussion that already started by my esteemed colleagues. And I would like to share some of my thoughts regarding the issue of creating safe learning environments. I would like to share my screen, so hopefully this will work. So I have some visuals that would be helpful, I think, in my presentation. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you. So again, it's a pleasure to be part of this panel, and I was asked to address two main questions here. I consider them to be big questions, and I think Dr. Tigist started us on that, answering some of these questions regarding the context sensitivity and regarding the reduction of violence and creating those not just safe learning environments that are physically safe, but also emotionally, cognitively, and also physically safe for children. So I will start my presentation by defining really what we're talking about. We've heard a lot of definitions and terms used in many forums regarding what is socio-emotional learning. I like to call it socio-emotional education. I also use the term psychosocial well-being, and you would find the major organization that has been working on socio-emotional learning defines it as the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills and attitudes that are needed to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals. This major organization is called CASEL. It's based in the US, and a lot of people use this model to start the conversation, but also build programs on socio-emotional learning. I just want to also say, whatever we call it, if we call it socio-emotional learning, socio-emotional education, if we also call it well-being, and if we call it soft skills, 21st century skills, none of this minimizes the importance of academic achievement, literacy, numeracy, and others. But we are starting to see more and more people giving attention to the emotional and social, and I'm also happy to add the spiritual aspects of human development. We don't see that in many of these models that are out there by different agencies and different INGOs. We don't see a lot of the attention given to spirituality, to faith, to religion, and so forth. I'm using these terms to say that we can call them in different ways, but we're really trying to get at the same thing. In terms of what we're trying to do in socio-emotional education is to work on the attitudes, the behaviors, and of course we know from research that this will also impact achievement and performance. In cases where we know that there is conflict and fragile context, we also should keep that in mind, that we're not only trying to teach resilience and teach empathy and others, but we're also integrating that with the understanding that students also need to learn numeracy and literacy. So I'm not advocating for one of the other, but an integrated approach that Dr. Tigist and others actually who just spoke brought it all together so nicely. Since we are here invited by UNESCO as part of the organizers, I wanted to also say that the socio-emotional education is aligned with this pillar of education that has been identified by a UNESCO report back in 1996. So it's not a new trend, but we go through cycles in education, I noticed. So maybe one decade we are so much interested in international assessments and achievement. The other one we're interested in, so we kind of go into cycles. But the learning to be is what we're talking about when we address socio-emotional learning. It's in addition to, of course, to the learning to know, learning to do, and learning to live with others. Arigato, for example, has been working on the learning to live with others for a long time. And I'm fortunate enough to be part of that conversation as well. very surprising to me, at least, to see that even the Organization for Economic Development just released 2 reports on the importance of socio-emotional learning and paying attention to that during the pandemic. It's important to make schools a safe space, not just for protection from the pandemic, but also to provide that psychological support that has been disrupted by the pandemic, the conflicts, the life conditions. We have seen natural disasters, wars, and all poverty that we all, of course, know about and trying to address here as well. I wanted to share with you the model that has been circulating around regarding socio-emotional learning. And it's interesting because I was at one of the international conferences I attended, and I presented there, and one of the people from the Ministry of Education of that country presented this model that has been adopted for their needs. And what happened is that the model has been taken as is and transferred into different contexts. And that's where I don't want to go back to the context sensitivity, but that's where I think it's important to pay attention to that, but also take into consideration the cultural context, the needs of the learners in the specific context. And if I may just give a few examples here, I'm coming from, I'm a Palestinian, I work in the Middle East, and I look at social awareness, for example. And I think in the Middle East, if I may generalize here, for the sake of making the point, that I think we are actually too socially aware. I think we're overloaded with social awareness. And so maybe we need to give focus to something else. Maybe, we need to focus on what's called the collaborative collective that I have been working on, meaning that it's not enough to be a collective society where the interest of the group is important or as important, and in some contexts more important than the individual, but also balance that with an attitude that is collaborative. I think that we function in our small groups, in our communities, in our clans, in our extended family very comfortably, but once this is disrupted, we find ourselves not able to maintain the collective, and that's why I would like to advocate for a collective that is collaborative. I don't know about you and what you think about things like self-management, self-awareness. I think that some of these could be actually replaced based on the context and based on the needs. And that's, of course, what requires this integrated approach that was mentioned earlier regarding coming up with programs and how we implement them in different contexts on socio-emotional learning or socio-emotional education. So in my study that I've been running with my team for about 2 years in 15 Muslim communities around the globe, we have 3 in East Africa where we surveyed Muslim youth educators and faculty and university students. We focus our research on psychosocial well-being, and in that we looked at other things that I think are as important when we talk about socio-emotional learning. Self-regulation, I think, is key, and that's key also in the Castle model. But there are also things like sense of satisfaction in life, meaning making, purpose, having a positive, making a positive difference in this world, and also gratitude, empathy, and forgiveness. And I am very much an advocate for forgiveness education, and I've been conducting research on forgiveness because I think in many of the fragile contexts, we are actually due for forgiveness education agenda. And then the second or the third term I would like to throw out there is this idea of sense of belonging. And it's not here, I don't mean the sense of belonging to the nation or to the ethnic group, but more the sense of belonging to my community, the sense of belonging to my environment, to my school, to my new settlement, and where I'm right now. I'm becoming aware of this importance of being part of the group, where I can be supported, accepted, and respected. And of course, we know from research that sense of belonging is predicted and is a predictor of positive coping mechanism, physical and socio-emotional well-being. We have evidence from research, from empirical research, from different contexts on that idea. So in order to bring all of this to the classroom or to the learning environment, let me say, whether it's formal or informal, I think that some of these points have been touched upon already regarding having a safe, well-managed, respectful, supportive. But I want to highlight the high expectations that even in fragile contexts, even in conflict contexts, I worked very closely with refugees in Palestine, refugees in Lebanon, refugees in Jordan, and keeping the high expectations from the learner is also as important. And I think it goes hand in hand with the resilience work we have seen in different programs that are implemented among refugees. And I also advocate for what I call intentionality on socio-emotional education, meaning that it's not enough to talk about socio-emotional skills in these kinds of webinars. I would like to be committed, and I'm committing myself here, to work with adults also. Adults need to be role models. If we're teaching forgiveness, and I want to say here to probably those people in peace education that I'm using forgiveness here similarly to how people use reconciliation, even though they are different, and that's a different webinar, but I'm using it here to say that forgiveness education is of criticality, but that the adults have to model that. The adults have to use teachable moments to do that. And in order for the adults to do that, our teachers, educators, leadership, taking this holistic approach again, an integrated approach, should be familiar and should be skilled. They should have the tools to work with developmentally and culturally competent communities and instruction, to use pedagogy that allows for conversations, dialogue, and asking questions. I have done work in Chad and in Islamic schools, and one of the things we worked on is how do we ask questions? How do we have open questions regarding a topic, rather than having a yes/no question? How can the teacher ask the right question? Because I think this is key in pedagogy as well. Here is another,
to interrupt, Dr. Nasser, you have about 4 minutes if you can wind up.
Yes, I am keeping my time. Thank you. So this is where we look at the impact of socio-emotional learning and how it actually can help with creating positive social behavior, reducing violence and reducing problems, as well as reducing emotional distress. To take a whole school approach, and I think that by itself will take time, and I'm happy to share these slides. Suchit has them with anyone who's interested, but that's what I mean when I talk about an integrated approach, meaning that you have to work on the different levels and you have to work with the different stakeholders, and we have to work with as early as possible. In regard to diversity and looking at, areas where we want to encourage, of course, diversity. It's not just diversity I'm talking about, but it's differentiation. Even if you have a group that's all similar and you're not working on differences, within each individual, there will be differences, and there will be people with different abilities, different skills, different personalities, different background, different maybe family culture. And that's where I argue again for the importance of educators coming into this equipped and prepared. And that's, of course, the investment in pre-service and in-service teacher development and teacher education. And I happen to be part of this socio-emotional learning group by Harvard University, where they put together all of these models that are out there internationally and map them out and try to show the weaknesses and differences and the strength of each. So I suggest for people to go to the EASL website. I think it is very informative. For people who would like to know more about the study I just mentioned, here's the website. And for people who would like to email me, here's my email. Thank you so much. And I appreciate this opportunity to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasser, and we really want to thank you very much for elaborating and giving us insights on how we can support and address the learners' needs on social-emotional learning, and also giving us tips on how we can create and build safe learning spaces that are inclusive, that are context-specific, and of course, you've highlighted the integrated approach and a number of other strategies. Just hold on to that hand, Benjamin Klonzo, until we are done with the presentations. We will have some time for discussion. And in case of any burning issue, you can still utilize the chat room to air it out, and then we are going to discuss them extensively. Now, colleagues, allow me, in the interest of time, to invite our next speaker, who is going to be none other than Mr. Darius Mogaka. He is the Director of Education in charge of the Directorate of University Education within the State Department of the State Department for University Education and Research in the Ministry of Education in Kenya. And he has been involved extensively in the formulation of a number of policies within this department and other relevant bodies and agencies, especially around issues of governance, around monitoring and evaluation, and building partnerships, and quite a lot of things that he has done. And he'll be talking to us in terms of what are some of the specific needs that are arising during conflicts and emergencies that we should pay attention to as educators? And then how do we also create safe learning spaces for our students that are institutions of higher learning and in teacher training? Given the short time that we have, allow me, colleagues, to hand over to Mr. Mogaka Darius. The floor is yours right now.
Thank you, moderator. Maybe if someone can share the slide. Yes, thank you very much. And my presentation is on creating safe learning spaces during conflicts, emergencies, and more specifically, the COVID-19 pandemic. If you could just click on slideshow, then we continue to the second slide. Thank you. The first question that I was supposed to discuss was on the needs that arise during the conflicts and emergencies, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, I've given a general overview, and the basic requirement and need that arises is how do we continue offering the services we've been offering in the situation of a pandemic or an emergency. In this case, how do we continue the teaching, learning, and research service delivery? And what has happened in most institutions of higher learning, we've had remote or emergency teaching in case of lockdowns, where various categories of the population are restricted. There's restricted movement. You are either staying at home or within your locations. Therefore, learning still has to continue, and in most cases, institutions revert to remote or emergency teaching. Then, as you realize that the lockdown is not short-term, then you graduate into online or blended learning, so that for purposes of continuing service delivery, then you're forced to provide online learning, either fully virtual access, in some situation, blended learning with some sessions for face-to-face, especially if you're having practicals. But over and above this, in the case of COVID-19 pandemic, then you realize that the need for vaccinations becomes paramount, so that individuals are protected and they protect the other persons that they come into contact with. And other than facilitation for vaccinations, there is a requirement for rapid response in case you have fallouts or situations that escalate within the institutions and that require evacuation or rapid movement to health facilities or to get emergency teams to come in and sort out the situation. And this may result in a panic attack in the institution, like what used to happen initially when the news about COVID-19 came. People were so scared that they could run away. Even health workers, if they suspected you had COVID-19, would run away and leave you in the waiting bay, maybe. Then there is the need to have communication with the emergency teams, informing the hospitals in case you have a situation that requires immediate attention, having ambulances on standby or paramedics to evacuate persons that may be in need of such. Then getting in touch with the administration officers to be able to align with the necessary government guidelines in dealing with the pandemic. In the situation of the COVID-19, then there was a requirement across the country for all institutions to adhere to the COVID-19 protocols in terms of keeping social distance, wearing masks, sanitizing, washing their hands, and making sure that activities are carried out in well-ventilated rooms or lecture halls. And then the bigger aspect of sensitization of the student body, the faculty, and all staff. What is the implication on individual personal health or safety? And within an institution, what are the stakeholders expected to do? And this is so that it is a complete system response to the situation that we find ourselves in. Next slide, please. Then I was to discuss the role of educators in building safe learning spaces. Now, in education institution, you realize that as you strive to ensure service delivery is ongoing, you've got to give an assurance that all necessary precautions have been taken to avoid any hotspot of spreading the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, making sure the necessary spaces are properly cleaned up, and where need be, they're sanitized, and the necessary sanitizing facilities, the washing, the social distancing, the wearing of masks are adhered to, just to assure all users that they're in safe spaces. Then information dissemination. What has happened with the COVID-19 is that there is a lot of information that is out there, some of which is not factual. So then how do you disseminate accurate and timely information to the publics and stakeholders to ensure that they act responsibly and accordingly and do not degenerate into panic or do not let up on the protocols and end up being casualties or victims of the pandemic? Then the general aspect of preparedness. As institutions, we required that they take time to prepare themselves to deal with a situation that was not normal and carry out the necessary protocols that were required. So preparedness at the institutional level, even forming committees that were to look at the COVID-19 protocols and having teams from government go around to assess and actually approve that institutions have adhered to the protocols and are ready to continue learning or teaching and learning and offer services. Then monitoring the evolving situation. In some cases, the situation may be such that you may have to cease all form of learning or service delivery if the situation is such that it cannot be possible to carry on even with social distancing. And we have seen this in situations where we have had lockdowns and even restricted movement or restricted times of operation. Then a key element is offering guidance and counseling. In a learning institution, as people panic about the pandemic, then there are several possibilities of risks that may occur if proper information is not given out proper emotional support is not availed to the publics, and even medical support where necessary, even if it's in the form of moving a concerned person to a medical facility for them to get medical attention. So this is a critical aspect of building safe learning spaces, so that your stakeholders are able to know where they can go to for information, what they can do in case they find themselves in a certain situation, the symptoms that may lead to them seeking medical attention, and so forth. Then there is the aspect of protecting both the students and educators. And here we talk about those who are most vulnerable. You realize that in universities, majority of the lecturers, the professors, are of advanced age. And these are the cohort that are classified as vulnerable. So when you have lecturers above 60 years and some even up to 70 years or above, then they are vulnerable persons in the community. And if they are coming into a situation where they are engaging with students who are much younger and maybe more tolerable to the virus, then you find that they are exposing themselves and they may be exposed as well. And in fact, we've had situations where senior lecturers have succumbed to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the nature of the behavioral aspect of the young people who are mostly the majority in institutions of higher learning, how they conduct themselves and how they carry out their near normal activities without putting themselves at risk and exposing others. Then the issue of leadership in carrying out mitigation measures. When we ask people to go for vaccinations, are we leading by example? Are we providing spaces in the learning institutions to offer the vaccinations to those who are willing? Are we giving guidance on where these vaccinations can be found? If, for example, we are thinking there is an outbreak in our institution, are we able to bring in the health personnel, the medics, to carry out testing, mass testing, so that we are able to tell whether our stakeholders have contracted the virus or not, and thereafter carry out necessary mitigation measures. And then it has been a requirement that each institution has a COVID-19 management plan that is formulated and adopted by the institution, and the implementation carried out across board to ensure that anyone coming into this learning space, anyone engaging with the institution is safe and can be assured of the same. Next slide, please.
You have only 4 minutes to wind up.
Yes,
so if you can wrap it up,
on my
please.
last slide.
Thank you.
And then how does safe learning spaces matter in higher education and teacher training? Now, I indicated earlier that higher education has a diverse group of stakeholders. Most of these are either researchers. If they are not students, they are researchers researching on various areas. They are people who are advanced in age and therefore vulnerable. They are people who are young and more active and may be involved in activities that may expose them to the virus. And therefore, how do you manage this diverse group and ensure that they are safe within an education institution? And then as centers of research, are we able to have concerted effort in finding solutions to deal with the pandemic? And we've seen a number of our universities come up with solutions, be they ventilators, be they testing kits, even masks and the personal protective equipment, just to try and contribute towards the solutions that are being sought to deal with the pandemic. And then as lead agencies and leaders, since the focus is on how our experts in the medical field are doing, how are we going to generate knowledge, information that can save our publics and our stakeholders out there? Then the safe learning spaces that we intend to establish for effective teaching and learning to take place, unless we are able to assure the public that our study rooms, our lecture rooms, our classrooms have been fumigated, have been properly ventilated, and social distancing is carried out, then we may not be able to carry out safer learning space, have safe learning spaces. Lastly, issues of ensuring that the stakeholders are taken through the possibilities or eventualities, in some cases even drills or virtual realities, so that they are able to prepare themselves in case they find themselves in a situation that needs their immediate action. And most lastly, making a provision for the most vulnerable groups, those who may be having special needs, those who have advanced age, those who may not be able to maybe read and understand what is set out there. How do we provide for them? This, among others, will ensure that whoever is in higher education space and teacher training, if we are going to continue with offering education, then we provide safe learning spaces and ensure and assure our publics that they are safe. And it indeed, we've seen that in most cases, schools and institutions of learning are some of the most safe places to be in during this pandemic. And we've been asking parents to even stay away, let the children be in school for the purposes of containing the pandemic. I think with that, I have deliberated on the general aspect that I was expected to do. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mogaka. We really appreciate those wonderful highlights in terms of what needs to be done for institutions of higher learning and education. And our time is running so fast, so I won't spend more time re-echoing a few things that you've mentioned. I saw a hand being raised, but I'm going to request our guest, please utilize the next session after this presentation to air out your view, or utilize the chat room. Our next speaker and panelist is Ms. Shreya Jani. She's a consultant of PVE and talking across generation on education in rethinking the youth team at the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education, Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. So she'll be talking about aspects of social and emotional learning within the context of PVE, or prevention of violent extremism. So let me hand over to you right now. Over to you.
So much, Dr. Victoria, for this amazing opportunity, and Jerusalem for letting us be here. And to all the speakers, you've really inspired us and given us a great foregrounding. I will be sharing my presentation with you. I hope you can all see it. So I will be talking about social emotional learning for prevention of violent extremism from the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, based out of New Delhi's perspective. The UNESCO MGIEP, as we call it, is a Category 1 research institute in Asia Pacific, first of its kind, and it is very much committed to SDG 4.7, which is looking at peaceful and sustainable societies through education. And we do this through our digital pedagogies on social emotional learning. And I think in the context of COVID-19, where a lot of educators are struggling with online content and trying to see how it can translate into something that works for everybody in terms of their students, and in terms of what can work in terms of context of different students and all, we at UNESCO MGIEP have a very unique platform called Frame a Space, which is our digital platform for online courses, which is very user-friendly and is also requiring low bandwidth. And one of these courses that we have put there, which will be launched on the 11th of October 2021, is Youth Waging Peace. This particular course is directed at 18 plus individuals, and it is with the, sorry, I'm not being able to change my slide, wait. Let me try this again. For some reason, I can't change my slide. One more time. All right, so My apologies for keeping you waiting on this. So this particular course is a online course which we developed with the idea that it should be a narrative-based course or a story-based course, so that it can actually cater to a larger audience. As Dr. Ilham and Dr. Tigris have pointed out, that context is very important in educating for peace and sustainable development. And since we know that the audience have their own context, in order to create a level playing ground and in order to create a conversation between people from different contexts, we have created a fictionalized world of Ahayu, where we have started the conversation on what social-emotional learning for peace building can look at as for young people. This is also a self-paced learning course. That means that you can do it in your own time. It takes 16 hours, but you can start it and finish it as you wish. As I already mentioned, it's a narrative-based course, and the hope is towards the end of the course that you can take your theory and put it into practice. This is just a glimpse of the characters in the course. We have a narrator, Kalam Fariku, and we have different characters, and they get into different scenarios, and young people are told to reflect on these scenarios using UNESCO MGIEP's social-emotional learning framework called EMC Square, which is a play on obviously Einstein's theory of relativity. But at UNESCO MGIEP, EMC Square stands for empathy, mindfulness, compassion, and critical inquiry. And each of these components are reflected in terms of both skills that young people can develop and theories that young people can look at. In terms of empathy, we are looking at emotional resonance and perspective taking and fostering social connection. I think what Dr. Ilham said was very, very important. Part of this course looks at forgiveness, also looks at the individual's journey. We look at how trauma impacts individuals. What are some breathing techniques and techniques that young people can do in their daily lives, which can help them build emotional resilience. That leads me to the second point, which is mindfulness. And there we actually teach the technique of emotional regulation to people so that they can learn how to actually work from a point of resilience and not only as reaction to things. And obviously we have compassion, which is in our vocabulary something that translates empathy into action, so that we don't only get upset when we see other people suffering, but we also feel compelled to do something about it. And last but not least, we are committed to critical inquiry, because we believe that critical inquiry helps us put down a proper decision-making skills and not work from a knee-jerk response. When we see somebody in distress, we feel the need to just jump in without thinking. And I think the skill sets of critical inquiry kind of helps us take the pause and look back and look at all the context and the relevance and then move forward. So in terms of empathy and prevention of violent extremism, the course dwells on how can individual empathy be extended to the social empathy context, because we believe that social empathy is the cornerstone for social justice. And social empathy helps us understand people from different backgrounds, different ideologies, different identities, as Dr. Ilham was talking about it and Dr. Tigris was also talking about it. And it helps us kind of break away from stereotypes and break away from looking at the other as something threatening. So that is how the course approaches empathy in a very practical manner, trying to break prejudices and biases and trying to build a social cohesion and kind of a peaceful world. In terms of mindfulness, what does it have to do with violent extremism? We have to understand that violent extremism is based on the internal self-control choices that people are making based on their morality, and also the external, the exposure that they have had to injustices that they have seen or to ideas that they have gravitated towards. And the assumption here is that we all may have, while we may all have a tendency towards violence, when we lose control of this moral compass and our own self response to situations, that's when the violence may turn into action. So how do we actually dial back? How do we make sure that violence does not occur, physical violence does not occur. One of the key techniques that we teach the young people through this course is to understand the practice of mindfulness. This is a secular understanding of the practice of mindfulness, which normally gets misrepresented as meditation, which may have its own problems. Mindfulness is based on neuroscience and the neuroscience perspective of neuroplasticity. That is, that the way the brain can learn and relearn and rewire itself, if we bring it to attention and awareness, we can actually change the way we respond to things, deal with things like addiction more meaningfully, look at our own suffering and trauma and be able to watch it as an observer and kind of be aware of what our triggers are so that we don't spiral out when we are faced with an adversity. Our next bit is compassion. I think something similar to this compassion compass, Dr. Ilim already shared, and it's important to understand that compassion's Latin root is to suffer with. So compassion, unlike empathy, which is we feel another person's pain, also is a call to action. It includes empathy, but it also includes the desire to help people when they are in pain or suffering. And we believe that this is a cornerstone to build sustainable peace. And these are things that can be taught both theoretically and practically to young people by building their resilience zone, by making sure that they are in control of their emotions, and by making sure that they have the ability to think and critically analyze situations. And which brings us to the last peg of our EMC square theory in the context of prevention of violent extremism. The course delves into critical thinking. It looks at analyzing positions, disregarding postulates, categorizations, and criteria which make us make assumptions about others, and also kind of impairs our decision-making skills. And we look at the concepts of prejudices, stereotype, how they may fog our decision-making abilities, and how if we learn critical thinking and critical inquiry, we would be able to actually figure out a way to navigate the decision-making process a bit better. Just as an example of one of the skills in critical inquiry that we give people is media literacy in this course. And we believe media literacy is very important because misinformation spreads very fast across regions, especially hate speeches and information which incites violence are very quick to travel. And so what can we give our young people to kind of step back and kind of understand how we can deal with misinformation? So the framework that we have used in the course is the 5-question media literacy framework, in which if an individual is able to look at a WhatsApp message, a Facebook message, or any other kind of media information that they are getting and ask these 5 critical questions: who created this message? What creative techniques were used to attract my attention? How might different people understand this message differently from me? What values and lifestyles are pointed out and represented in the message? What are omitted? And why was this message sent? If we are able to ask these 5 questions before we forward any information to another person, we may be able to stem the tide of misinformation which surrounds us nowadays, and which also leads to panic and fear and also hate sometimes.
Ms. Farah, you have 1 minute.
Yes.
Yes.
The course content, as we said, has many things to it, many of which has already been talked about. And one thing that I wanted to really highlight is Dr. Ilam talked about forgiveness and gratitude. And I think that's something that we have in Chapter 11 looked deeply into as a way of fostering a culture of peace. And we look forward to many of you writing to me post this session. And if your institution is interested to try out this new online course, please feel free to contact me and we can take the conversation further. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to present.
Thank you very much. It's just been awesome listening to you, and apologies for you sounded rushing a bit, but we appreciate very much, and I know that the presentations are going to be shared. We have very limited time, colleagues, and we have a lot of questions in the chat room. Allow me to hand over to my colleagues Suchith and Jerusalem, who are going to help us take us through this session. Over to you, Suchith.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Victoria. I have few questions on my side, and I hope the Suchit also has some of the questions.
Yes, please go ahead. We also then we'll open it up for the plenary questions. Over to you, Iris.
Maybe we had Jerusalem maybe got disconnected. There was a question that the participants posed actually on the chat for Dr. Tigist. They were asking Dr. Tigist about invisible violence. What can you elaborate a bit more around the invisible violence that you highlighted? We can start with that question.
Yes. Hello, can you see me?
We can hear you, Dr. Yes.
Yes, I think it was Edward who asked the questions on what are the visible and invisible violence. Well, in my book, I don't know if you could see, I was going to show you on, let me see, on the desktop. Let me see if you could see, just one moment, to show them what I mean by visible and invisible. Mostly in my finding, I don't know if you could see. Can you see?
No, it's difficult to see from the video.
Yeah, the lighting, yeah. I'm trying to download it, so I will try to show them. So when I talk about visible and invisible violence, the visible violence, obviously, this are the bullying, physical fighting. Mostly the invisible violence is expressed in schools, and my finding is through graffitis by the students. They draw them in the walls of the school. They draw them in the school walls, in the chairs. So they are graffitis. And I do the conceptual analysis of Galting, ABC model. I'm sure most of you know it, the triangle, the attitude, the behavior, and the context. So based on that analysis, I've tried to show you, for instance, in one of the invisible violence, it's they wrote in Amharic. I wish I could show you. It says, "Trusting men is like catching a cloud," and also the other one says, "Trusting women is like going to the airport and waiting for a ship." It was written in Amharic on the school walls, and also there is one that says, "Red terror class." Lots of them. So these are the invisible violence that I wanted to show you. If it's yeah, it's not downloading. The internet is weak. I was gonna show you online. I mean my PowerPoint. So when I say invisible violence, I was trying to explain this. There were you know, invisible violence and visible violence in my finding. The use violence sprung from intertwined issues. I tried to mention earlier, from structural, cultural, and direct violence. When we say direct violence, the verbal, the physical violence, and then the use violence manifestations are obviously contextualized within the important variables in the school and home and community. So some of the gravities mentioned are the invisible violence that I found in the school. The other question actually addressed was related to what was the question on how do we get learners to take ownership in building safe learning environment. I will say some things maybe, and then Dr. Ilham also will answer some of them, and also how do you make them contribute to safe learning environment. I think I've tried to mention it in my presentation. How do you respond to the needs of the learners? I think first we have to actively encourage learners to collaborate with one another by creating safe space. And again, secondly, creating opportunities to discuss different viewpoints, by encouraging diversity of religion, ethnicity, and etc. And then encourage the development of respectful relationships. The relationship should be based on respect. And also, as educators, we have to encourage teamwork for problem solving rather than, promoting or encouraging competition. So as educators, we must create opportunities for collaboration, not only among those from, similar groups of ethnicity, religion, and etc., but also from, from different groups who have seen different and separate background. So that's how we create, collaboration. The other question that was asked by Dr. Yerusalem was to talk about, in Ethiopia context. Let me say that, and then I will summarize. So with regard to Ethiopia's context, I was gonna discuss about, for sustainable peace building process, the entry point could be in Ethiopia context is developing peace building strategy to better understand, obviously, the root cause of conflict in the school, and also mapping the different stakeholders that can attribute to peace building through genuine partnership and ownership. Revisiting the school policy curriculum could be one way, such as, by including teachers and students to participate in the curriculum, by, mainstreaming gender issues in the curriculum and developing, obviously, peace education within the package are some of the issues that I tried to mention earlier. For instance, to give you a practical example, in Ethiopia, the government of Ethiopia, through the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Higher Education, they're trying to revisit the defective educational policies that have triggered violence in schools within the framework of democracy in Ethiopia. For instance, we had 70-30 school policy. 70 for natural science and 30 for social science. Most students didn't like it, so this is one, but so many issues were reviewed, and the new curriculum is developed and revised by Ministry of Education from kindergarten up to high school level, and it will be fully implemented in 2015. Peace education, critical thinking, moral education, etc., etc., hate speech are included in this as a new component and added in the new curriculum. Again, in Ethiopia context, at the Ministry of Peace, we have youth volunteerism. We have we have youth volunteers, about 10,000 youth volunteers that are deployed across 10 regions. They are working on, environment, tree planting related to environment, and also going to, for instance, a student from Oromia goes to Amara, and Amara student go to Oromia, so that they learn different cultures and they learn about different ethnicity. We have that. The other one last example I could tell you maybe is Mothers for Peace. We have Mothers for Peace initiative. They try to avert the violence in university students. When they try to stop the violence, especially, I don't know if you follow Ethiopia politics, or the university students' violence was very high, especially in the last past year, 2 years, when there was so many violence in the universities. These Mothers of Peace, they try to avert this violence. So these were the issues that I would like to mention related to Ethiopia, I think related to Dr. Yerusalem's question. Back to you, Such.
Thank you, Dr. Tigis. We'll move quickly to
now,
Dr.
Sorry, can I show him to Edward? Now I think my slide is there. Can I show him briefly the pictures? Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to show him my findings, what I mean by invisible and...
Okay. We are a bit limited on time, so if
just
we can
30 seconds. Yes. I will be very brief because the internet is very weak. I just want to show them the graffitis. Can you see my slides?
We can. You're on the aspirations to be a teacher slide right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to show him the invisible and visible. See, this is what I meant when I talk about Edward. If you could see it, invisible valence. So these are the graffitis that are written in the school walls, and these are the finds that I found, such as literal class. What does it mean? Of course, you have to know the Ethiopia context. And then, for instance, teachers' valence towards teachers. Did you find a job yet, or are you still a teacher? So you can find this kind of graffitis throughout the school. The other one is if education was by corporeal punishment, a donkey could have been a professor. So it shows that there is valence towards students by teachers related to corporeal punishment. And yeah, that's it. These are some of the examples. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ilham, there were several questions related to what you presented as well. One question was around belonging. How do we encourage belonging, especially when there are groups that are excluded in society or marginalized in society? And then there was also a question when the parents are in conflict with one another, how do we help children in the learning environment also feel more supported as well? Maybe we start with those. And
okay, thank you, Suchit, and thank you for the questions for the audience. I think that in addition, in terms of the learning environments and how do we train or teach students to feel that sense of belonging, but also to feel part of the group, is I want to add to what Tigrit said, to add the idea of community mindedness as something that we could teach in school, the idea of empowerment, the idea of teaching responsibility. In the literature on social transformation, teaching responsibility is one of those key transitional points that we can actually expose youth. And how do we do that? We do it by engaging them, of course, in leadership skills and being out in the community. And then the piece for those who feel in the minority group, I think that creating a classroom community, creating this idea of being responsible for each other. I like the concept of compassion, mindfulness that was presented. So I think the issue here is that the educators themselves should be diverse, should be bringing the diverse perspectives, and should be equipped with the tools to be able to expose students to becoming leaders and to be part of tapestry, or what we call here a salad bowl, rather than a mushy mixture of everyone who's the same, but actually to bring to students this perspective about differences. And of course there are boundaries, and of course there are challenges, and in different contexts it could look different. But I think focusing on the students, their welfare, knowing that they're coming from this small minority group, and teach everyone else to interact in whatever all these good skills that we just talked about, would be key to ensure that. Now, if there are conflicts with parents and this is carried to the school, that's a huge question. But I think that working with students again on resilience, on coping mechanism, on protecting themselves, on finding someone to be of support is definitely key. I'll stop here because I know that, Suchit, you have other questions for other people. Thank you. Back to you.
Yes, thank you. There was a question, Shreya, for you before you need to leave. You presented a very interesting course, and I think you are targeting young people who will be involved. Do you already have some young people who've been going through the program and the course, and they're now already working with others with this sensitivity? And how are some of those teachers potentially? How is it impacting their work with the next level in their countries? You're muted.
The course will be officially launched on October 11th, but we have done something called context review, which is basically we have asked about 200 people to kind of sorry. Okay. So sorry. We've asked 200 young people to take the course. This included young faculty from different institutions in South Asia, and they all did the course. And as I said, that the course is heavily invested in looking at how to deal with trauma, with fear, with anxiety in the first half, and then bringing it to the community level in the second half. And they all seem to have learned a lot. The feedback that we got was tremendous. People learned about how to, regulate panic attacks, how to do grounding techniques, how to do tracking techniques. So they learned some psychological first aid toolkits for themselves. And there was a lot of reflective questions, and they were able to learn about peace building theory, as mentioned by Dr. Tigris also, and by Dr. Ilham, about the concept of positive peace, negative peace, and structural violence. And so I think overall, the responses that we've gotten from people who have tested the course have been very positive. And since it's context-based, since it's narrative-based, they have all agreed that it has worked in various contexts. So, we are aware that culture is different in every context, but storytelling is something that binds most cultures together. And I think using the tool of storytelling to do this exercise has really helped it transcend boundaries and cultural identities. Thank you.
Thank you. I see it as a very good example of how dynamically we can use such programs in our teacher training work as well. When teachers have gone through such opportunities themselves, how more effective they can be when they are able to manage their classrooms later on. So maybe that takes me to Darius with the next question. How do we build the skills of building safe learning environments? There's a set of skills, maybe an awareness that educator needs. How do we build this during the teacher training processes? How do we bring this more into our teacher training work, into our higher education institute? Mr. Darius, if you can help us think further on that.
Suchit, thank you. And maybe it would be my last comment because I have to exit. The key thing here is that we've got to look at our curricula, both for teacher training and in higher education, and see what we can inbuild. Some of these things that are coming up are new, and we have to do some curriculum review and integrate them in our curricula that is taught. Essentially, when you require teachers to prepare and be able to take learners who are under their charge through such periods like the pandemic, then you require to equip them with skills, special skills to manage emergencies, to manage crises. And this can only be done if it is integrated in the curriculum that they go through in teacher training, and also as part of in-service training for purposes of preparing them to deal with eventualities like the pandemic. I believe whether it's in the university or in the teacher training colleges, we've got to review the curriculum and maybe take the teachers through crisis management and emergency preparedness to ensure that in whichever situations that they find themselves in, they minimize losses to human life that is under their responsibility. Suchit?
Thank you, Mr. Darius. We are just slightly over time. I know the questions are many and then the conversation is very rich, but I think I will hand over to Dr. Victoria again as we are about to wrap up.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much, Suchit. It's just quite a very interesting discussion, but the time is also not on our side. And also the networks are playing us out. But I just want to thank you so much for your patience, colleagues. Forgive us for being 6 minutes overboard, but we want to thank you so much for the time. And as we are concluding this, I just want us to, first of all, give a round of thanksgiving to all our panelists. And I want to thank, first of all, the director, Dr. Yumiko, for her opening remarks. They were really, they started us very well, started us off very, very well in terms of what needs to be done and also contextualizing the whole situation and scenario. Thank you so much, Dr. Yumiko, and also for reminding us that we need to focus a lot more on peace as a priority within the context of Africa. It also features in the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, and also making sure that within the institutions of higher learning, a number of these factors are contextualized as we try to build peace for our young people and making sure that the learning environments are also peaceful. And I want to thank also all the panelists, Dr. Tigist, Dr. Ilham, Dr. Mr. Mogaka, and also my colleague, Ms. Sheria from the Institute. We want to thank you very, very, very much for the wonderful insights. You've taught us a lot, and I'm sure colleagues are looking forward to your presentations. And there are quite a number of things I've learned. The aspect of contextualization has been mentioned a lot, making sure that schools are given a lot of priority in terms of preparedness. Teachers need to be trained, aspects of making sure that context sensitivity is also paid attention to, and then responding to the needs of learners, and bring all the key players on board in an integrated manner. Those are things that you've highlighted, and I want to really appreciate you so much for all these insights that you've given us. And then Mr. Mugaka mentioned there's need to have a COVID-19 management plan at all levels, not only at the institutions of higher learning, but even within the school systems. We need to be very organized and making sure that the leadership is at the forefront. We want to thank you very, very much for all these insights, and also the colleagues that have asked questions. It shows you are listening in carefully, and I believe that our panelists have been able to give justice and respond to the key questions. So let us continue the discussions informally regarding the emails that have been shared, and also within our own spaces. Thank you everyone for the time, and I want to wish you a wonderful afternoon, morning, and evening to all the colleagues.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You can turn on the video and say bye to the colleagues.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
And thank you, Dr. Victoria, for a wonderful moderator.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Excellent, Chair Victoria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yumiko. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
You're welcome. And thanks so much to Suchit, our